I'm going to introduce our speakers today. I'm very proud to have them as my coworkers. We have Aman Hihar. He's the Associate Director of Energy and Climate Change at Humber, and he's also our resident expert in designing efficient buildings, deep retrofits, and the optimization of operations for energy efficiency. Also joining us is Spencer Wood. Spencer is the Director of Facilities Management at Humber. He's been working here for 20 plus years, and he's really the original pioneer of sustainability at the college. He's helped build the value of sustainability in our culture. He's also helped build the team. In his role, he oversees all the operations and maintenance activities at the college, and he plays a really important role in strategizing Humber's sustainability and energy initiatives on campus. So Spencer and Aman, you might already know them through their thumbnails, seen them through our social media communications, anything that we share out, because they're both really central to most of Humber's biggest sustainability milestones. That includes the release of the Humber's Climate Action Plan, our Integrated Energy Master Plan, and projects like Switch, which of course we've been trying to scream to the rooftops. It's a retrofit project that's cut our natural gas consumption at our North Campus by 70% and reduced our total emissions as a college by 30%, which is pretty significant. So I'm going to get into the first question. Spencer, can you give us an overview of what Humber's Green Building Standards are and why they were created in the first place?
Sure, thanks, Tessa. Yeah, so our Green Building Standards, they lay out what we want as a college in renovations and new construction in terms of sustainability features. They've been about 8 years in the making since we really started going hard after energy efficiency. In doing all those projects over the 8 years, we learned an awful lot about all the different types of things, of what we like in a project, what makes sense financially, what works for us. And those are the things that were put into the standards. So, for example, we did a passive house retrofit in 2018, and that really guided what we've put in there for building envelope. As a college, we have a mandate from our institutional strategic plan that says we want to be a national leader in sustainable campuses, which in the facilities department we took to heart. But we realized that to meet the goals that we have set, which we'll get into later, we weren't going to meet it. We weren't going to hit that with just retrofit work. We had to take every opportunity when building new buildings and renovating to move to the new standards. But it's a small team. We don't have the resources to be involved in every decision that's happening in every project. So that's where the Green Building Standards come in. They lay it out, and we'll have conversations where people need clarification, but we're hoping that most of it's in the standard. But going through the process of developing the Green Building Standards really gave us a chance to get buy-in from all of our construction people and to achieve consensus on what's in and what's out, where the lines are drawn. I'm sure we'll get into some of those discussions in the questions today. They're designed to be easy for our project managers to include them in the specs when they're tendering a project or talking to an architect or an engineer. And we've made them publicly available, as Tessa just shared the link, both for engineers and architects that we're working with, but also as a starting point for any other institution that is on a similar path. And to be honest, we did the same when we were developing these standards. So we're returning the favor, shall we say. So I think I'll stop there and go to the next question.
Perfect. So thanks for that overview. I know a lot of thought went into the different types of construction projects that we do at Humber and what the criteria should be for each in the standards. Aman, can you give an explanation of how the requirements are broken up by project type?
Yeah, so I'll just give a quick overview. So the standards are divided up into 4 distinct documents. You can see the cover pages here on the slide. And, each is for a different type of project. So we've got 4 For project types, like I said, the type A's are the new builds, additions, and major rentals, but the large ones, right? It's bigger than typically 2,500 square meters, 15 million square feet. Type B, same type of buildings or projects, new builds, additions, and major rentals, but much smaller. With type C, we're getting into the interior renovations and fit outs. But typically these would be the larger ones, over 3 million in capital budget. And then type D are our simplest projects, you know, again, interior rentals and fit outs, but typically between 100K and $3 million. As you might imagine, you know, the green building requirements are the most onerous for the type A projects. You know, these are our biggest projects. They have the longest schedules, largest budgets. So, you know, there's an opportunity to be more sophisticated in our requirements there. And if we contrast that with the type D, for example, you know, here the green building requirements are very limited, right? But in our minds, that's okay, because these projects also have the smallest impact in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, I'll pass it back over to you, Tessa, for the next question.
Yeah, sure. So we've had a lot of interest in the green building standards for new builds specifically. Can you do a deeper dive into type A projects?
Yeah, of course. I'm just gonna stop sharing the slide here and share my screen. So bear with me for a second. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So, you know, I understand why there's, you know, so much interest in the type A. These are the biggest projects, biggest impact. I'll try to do a bit of a deeper dive into the type A's. The standard is quite long, and there's a lot of detail in there. So I'll try to make this as interesting as I can. So what I have here is the table of contents from the type A standard on the left on the slide. And then on the right, I have the actual PDF document for the green building standard. And I'm just going to go through some of the major sections and scroll through the standard as I do it. So hopefully that's easier to follow along. So I want to start with this building standards and certification section. So we've mandated LEED Platinum certification for all of the type A projects, and also zero carbon building standard certification. There's a lot of text here, which I'm not necessarily going to cover, but, you know, like Spencer said, you know, through our experience, there's, you know, in some cases, certain credits we want the teams to pursue, or certain options within the standards we would like them to pursue. And so that's detailed in here. I'd say in general, 70% of what you need is probably covered by just pursuing the standards, and everything else in this document is complementing what's in these standards or enhancing it where we felt it was appropriate. So moving on to kind of the first major section afterwards, it's the greenhouse gas emissions and energy efficiency. A few things I wanted to highlight here. We've mandated an energy use intensity target. So this is energy use per square foot per year. Square meter per year. And we've pegged it right to the Toronto Green Standards highest tier, tier 3. So all buildings, all projects have to be within 65 to 75 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year, which is fairly aggressive. Another kind of interesting topic is the building envelope. Like Spencer said, we've done a lot of building envelope work, and we've learned a lot from that experience. We're big believers in high performance envelopes in general. And so you'll see a lot of requirements around envelope in the standards. We've got a vendor of record list for envelope consultants. We've put their contact information right in here in the standard. And the idea is for the project teams to hopefully carry one of them as part of the project. And then there's a very detailed scope of work of what we want that consultant to do as part of the project. So, what we want them to do during design reviews, how to mitigate thermal bridging, durability, reducing air leakage, all that's kind of defined in here. Going on into construction, there's, mock-up reviews, site visits, and it goes all the way to post-construction where we mandate IR scanning for all the buildings at the end of the construction. Okay, moving along, the next big section is health and wellness. So we took a look at two of the kind of popular standards in this area, the WELL Building Standard and Fitwell. Hopefully those names are familiar to people. We didn't have much experience with those standards, so we leveraged a consultant to support this part. In the end, we decided not to include mandatory certification under those standards as part of our green building standards. But instead, what we did was we kind of cherry picked requirements, credits out of those standards that we liked and built them right into here. So I can give a couple examples. Things like, staircases being in a central location and aesthetically pleasing to try to encourage people to take stairs instead of elevators. Having workstations next to glazing. High filtration rates on all the filtration. Adjustable thermostats in private offices, operable windows in private offices. I won't go through them all, but that kind of gives you a flavor of what's in here. Then moving along, we've got this academic and living lab section. So, a lot of these projects, the sustainability features are invisible, right? They're behind walls, they're in mechanical rooms. So the idea here was we wanted all the projects to have some visible sustainability elements and also some signage associated with that so people could learn. So this section essentially requires projects to have 2 visible sustainability elements at a minimum as part of the project. There's an example here of a mock-up we did for a building envelope, which has been really, really helpful when we give tours. But it's things like this that we're looking for. But it's a bit flexible. Essentially, we've asked for a charrette as part of design, and we'd work together with the project team to figure out what makes the most sense for the project. Okay, moving along, there's a marketing and comms section. We're essentially asking teams to submit a data sheet for the project, explaining all the features, and submit that. So we have kind of a starting point to develop marketing material around. And then getting close to the end here, there's a resiliency section. So, we did a bit of research in Toronto specifically. The main areas of focus seem to be, higher risks due to flooding, extreme heat and cold events, power outages as a result of a changing climate. And so there's kind of text around each of those core areas in here about what we want the design teams to achieve. And frankly, I think this is an area that's going to evolve over time as we also learn more about, what it takes to make a building resilient, and as we get experience operating buildings, and having the climate change kind of in front of our eyes. Last couple of sections here, we got accessibility, reference to a standard we like, and then an EDI section, equity, diversity, inclusion. Essentially, we've asked for a charrette here with our EDI department. Looking to spur some ideas on how we can make the building more equitable and inclusive. Okay, I'll stop there. That basically takes us to the end of the standard. We can get into more details during the Q&A.
Okay, yeah. And I'll also mention I see some folks putting some questions in the chat, and we will get to those during the Q&A. So that was really useful. Thanks, Aman. And I'm wondering if it might also be helpful for folks if we were to contrast the type A with smaller projects like type C. And if you wouldn't mind going into a deeper dive about type C project requirements.
Yep, no problem at all. So I'll do it similar to how I did the type A. I've got the table of contents from the type C on the left here on the slide, and I'll just pull up type C standard. So And there's a lot of overlap between A and C, so it's going to go much faster this time. But hopefully the first thing you notice is just the size of the document. It's only 17 pages versus 25, and that just speaks to, I guess, the comment earlier about the requirements being less and less onerous for smaller projects. So I'll start with the same building standards and certifications section. So LEED does have a rating system for interior design and construction. We didn't mandate certification under that standard. What we did instead is we went through it and, again, cherry picked specific credits that we really liked and thought were valuable to us. And so we've mandated those. And what we've asked for is the team to carry a sustainability consultant, and their role would be to essentially act as if the project was going to be certified, provide input on design, and during construction, collect all the documentation, work with the contractor to make sure they understand what's required, and then put a package together as if they were certifying and submit it to Humber. And that way, we have assurances that the stuff that we want is actually getting done. Moving on to the greenhouse gas emissions and energy efficiency, you'll notice much smaller this time, right? We've essentially just said, hey, we've got some really robust mechanical electrical standards and specifications, and we'd like the team to comply with those. And then on the building envelope side, in most cases, there will not be envelope work as part of the interior renos, but when there is, we've provided our consultant information again. This time, some prescriptive requirements for the envelope and some really basic scope for the envelope consultant to carry out. On the type A, we had an academic living lab section. We took it out for the type C, again, just speaking to trying to keep it simple for the smaller projects. We also have this health and wellness section. It's very similar to the type A. I won't go through it. It's just been stripped down to only the things that apply to a renovation. Marketing comms is exactly the same as type A. And then for resiliency and climate readiness, again, very similar to type A. We've just stripped out the things that don't apply to an interior renovation. Same accessibility requirements. And then we've removed the EDI section. Again, just trying to keep it simple for smaller projects where they have less of a potential to make an impact in this area. Okay, and I'll just stop there, Tessa. I'll send it back your way.
Great. Okay, thanks for the comparison. I know that when we released the standards, we got a lot of really great feedback that they looked great and that they were really ambitious. But we had a lot of questions also, and people expressing that they've struggled to get kind of similar initiatives approved at their own institutions. So can we talk a bit about how our team got these approved and how we moved them down the chain?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the latest question in the chat from David is, do you have trouble enforcing your standards once budget or construction timeline pressures comes in? And the answer to that is no. It's probably been 4 years since I've had to fight for sustainability features in a project. And I'll tell you why and how we've done that in this next piece. So in 2015, Humber embarked on a process that we called the IEMP. It's the Integrated Energy Master Plan. You want to go to the next slide, Amon? There we go. And it took us a year to go through that planning process. And you might say that's an awful lot of time to put into something that by itself doesn't save any energy or reduce any carbon. But this has been the key to buy-in for the entire program. So what it was is we set it up with like call it a steering committee, a project work team on this slide. And we had people from all over the institution involved. So it was co-sponsored by 2 VPs. One was the academic VP, one was the admin VP. And then there was us, from facilities and energy there, but there was also finance and procurement and sustainability, and we had some students involved and some academic people from the academic side of the house. And then on the other side, we also had a consultant who was helping us with all of the work that was happening in the background. And where we went through the year, we had milestones. And so the first one was benchmarking. So we looked at, I think there's a slide in a minute, but what we looked at how everybody was performing for energy in the world, and then we picked a target. But everybody agreed to that. And then we did another one where we were looking at what happens if we don't do anything. And then we had a high risk and a low risk cost analysis and greenhouse gas analysis. And, where would we be with new construction and costs, inflation and everything in 20 years? And so we went through this process of everybody agreeing on what the risks were, setting the standards, and agreeing on a solution. So when we came out the back end, everybody was on board. Go to the next slide. There we go. So this is just some of the benchmarking that we did against some other institutions across the world. And this is how we came up with our targets, which is on the next slide. So these are pretty aggressive targets because we weren't that bad to begin with, frankly. 50% reduction per square foot of energy. That's the one that's driving a lot of this. Water also 50% per student in this case. Carbon has been tricky because it's a 30% reduction, but it's an absolute reduction. We have a financial return, and we also have an academic goal where we're trying to get into the curriculum as well. So that's what everybody in the institution has agreed to. And then we went to work on our projects. Next slide. Oh, right. Okay, so why this has worked for driving these standards is we got this broad stakeholder participation, buy-in, and we've been fortunate in that institutional knowledge is still here today, 8 years later. Everybody gets it, why we're doing it and why and what we're doing and why. We also went through this process. We only sold it once. So I don't have to do a business case for every single project. I don't have to do it for the sustainability or energy features in every project. We sold this once. We said, this is the payback. This is why we should do it. And one, that saves an awful lot of time doing it every time, but there's no possibility of it being denied at any point. Everybody knows this is just how we do it. We also blended the payback. So this is more on the retrofit side, but we got a multi-year commitment to dollars for retrofit work and the money, and that's in the capital plan, and we're just pulling against it. So we know how much money we have. We know when it's coming. We believe that this is the only way to get to savings like 50% reduction in energy use. Otherwise, if you're just doing incremental pieces, your number won't move, and you probably, because that's where we were before we started this, and I'm going to guess that most people are in that boat today. You do projects, excellent projects, but does your number move? Not much, right? Our number has moved a lot. We also made sure that we integrated the energy into all major capital decisions. So this is the new builds mostly, which is where the green building standards come in. And by going through this process, we've really shifted the culture at Humber. So we used a lot of the things we learned from the sustainability plan, and we applied them to energy more specifically, and that has created this energy efficiency culture within the whole organization, but everybody from the operators right up to the VPs. Everybody knows why, and it's a priority. We have the academic goals that really help to sell everything. And we are also getting results. So the results aren't the point of today's presentation, but I am going to quickly show you some things, and you'll understand why everybody at Humber is pretty happy with this, I think. All right, next one. Okay, so these are some of the projects that we have delivered over the last 8 years. There's not much in here that's unusual. I'm sure if we talk to any of your institutions, you would have projects on this list. We've gone a little harder in the building envelope than most. What may be different is that we have done them all. So we don't have one or two signature projects and then a bunch of incremental pieces. We have a signature project in every one of these pieces. And so that has driven the results. Next one. So this is as of last March, a year ago. We are currently at 24% reduction in energy per square foot. So we're halfway to our goal. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline under construction now that's going to push that even higher. GHG number is lagging because we added a lot of new buildings early in that 8-year time frame before we got these green building standards in place. So we added about 25% square footage during that time. So to get the GHG number down, we had to get rid of all of that emissions first and then pull it down on the other pieces. And we're about halfway with the water goal as well. Next one. And this has translated into dollar savings, big dollar savings. So this is straight dollars, not corrected for weather or anything like that. We peaked at $7 million in 2016. This year, we're projecting about $6 million. So there's been inflation, obviously, over that 8 years period. But we've also added 25% to square footage. So the college is saving roughly $2.4 million a year just on the energy side. And the finance people are thrilled because our budget has not, in fact, it's gone down. It hasn't gone up. And it would have gone up an awful lot more. So that's given us a lot of credibility and currency when we started trying to float these green building standards. Okay, and is that the last one, Aman?
Yeah, that's the last slide.
Okay, so that's the end to my answer for this one, and I will back to you, Jessa.
Great. Well, we've made our way through our presentation. The section on the IMP was the last one for us, but I think we're making very, very good time. So I'm just going to go back to the chat, and I'm going to go all the way back up and start reading out some questions. So this one is from Norm. So City of Toronto Green Building Standards lead passive house. Thoughts on spreading standards too broad versus being more prescriptive towards one key standard?
I can take that one on. Let's see. Toronto Green Standards mandatory in Toronto anyway. So there's not much in the standard around that. It's basically you got to do it, and they know they have to do it in Toronto. Beyond that, we LEED and zero carbon building certification, they're kind of different animals. And so we felt we needed to have both in the standard. The zero carbon building standard, it's big on energy efficiency and, operating carbon, embodied carbon in the construction. And then LEED is kind of everything else related to sustainability, all the other things that, you need if you want a sustainable building, but aren't necessarily related to energy efficiency. So that's why we went with those two. I see passive house listed here as well. We've done one passive house building, but in our minds, those are more like showcase projects. It would be tough to do that on every project, just given the complexity and the cost.
I'll just add that the net zero carbon standard, we're doing that because we also have a net zero carbon target, and we quickly realized that we have to start making it worse. So as we build a new building, we can't add to our carbon. So the new builds have to be zero, or we won't get there at all. So that's the driver there.
Great. So I'll move on to the next question. Catherine asks, there are so many standards and energy guidelines out there. What made you choose the ones you did versus others?
I think I answered that in the last answer. Anything to add to that? I'd say just going back to the passive house comment. The latest version of the zero carbon building design standard, version 3, now has a lot of stuff on building envelope in it, which we're really happy to see. Which again, in my mind, means less of a need to look at a standard like passive house, which is big on building envelope, because it's covered in the zero carbon building standard now.
Okay. Do you feel getting LEED Platinum certification is necessary, or is simply following LEED criteria and standards just as adequate? LEED and Platinum can be a challenge, and there can be more expenses sometimes with no payback. Is there a marketing component to some of your decisions to go for certification?
Yeah, there absolutely is. I kind of agree with your statement here that it may be not necessary to build a green building to get the actual certification, but there's other reasons to do it, and that's why Humber has decided to go along down this path. In that there's a certain cachet, and people don't understand what a green building is generally, but they understand. People might have heard of LEED Platinum, and that drove some of those decisions. The other pieces that we have seen, we did, again, this was a while ago, we did some buildings to LEED standard but didn't certify them. And it wasn't quite the same, frankly, because there wasn't the same rigor. We didn't really get the same product, I would say, in the end. No, but everybody was cutting corners, and it was kind of LEED-ish, but it wasn't quite what it was. So, but could you build a standard without it? Yeah, you probably could and get, 80% of the benefits. Absolutely, I think you probably could do that. Do you want to add to that, Mark?
Yeah, I did. I 100% agree with your comment on the LEED shadowing. Like in a previous life, I was in a consulting role, kind of working on projects as a sustainability consultant, and projects would try to do the shadowing, and it's exactly what you described. I don't know if it's deliberate, but competing priorities, right? People are focused on other things, and then you get to the end and you realize, at those certain times during design and construction where, a consultant needed to be in there, telling the designer to design it this way, or making sure the contractor, didn't install that thing that didn't comply. Those things got missed, and then you get to the end and it's not quite the same, right? And then I generally also agree that LEED Platinum, we did it for other reasons, but might not necessarily be the standard you want to have for your institution, right? I'm a big believer in LEED, but maybe it's LEED Gold, maybe it's LEED Silver. I think you do need the certification because it covers a whole bunch of stuff that you wouldn't get if you didn't certify, like construction waste management, all the material selection during design, and low VOC products, and there's all this stuff that happens that wouldn't otherwise happen if you didn't certify. So I'm a big believer in at least certifying or going silver or gold.
So I have a question here that I'm going to try and interpret. Is our internal rate of return, is it incremental capital cost versus energy savings, or is it energy plus carbon tax?
Both. Yeah. So the cost is the cost of the retrofit work. The savings is a combination of energy savings, carbon tax avoidance in this case, and conceivably there might be maintenance savings in there as well. I don't think we actually counted that, but there could have been, and that adds up to a number, and that's what goes in the in there. What we didn't include in that, but is a driver in this, is deferred maintenance. So in doing a lot of these projects, we have retired a lot of deferred maintenance. And that is not in the payback calculation, but you could probably make the argument it could be, but we didn't do that.
Okay. We're getting a question if you can tell us a little bit more about the energy master plan, the integrated energy master plan and its development. Is there any more details you would offer, maybe for someone who's looking to see if they could implement it at their own institution?
Yeah, I mean, probably another hour presentation to get into the detail. So, okay, so we hired a consultant to help us with the work that happened behind the scenes. So they did the benchmarking, they did the risk analysis, they did all of that work. And then we came to the targets, and then they took, I'd say, a very high level rule of thumb engineering approach to what is one solution to getting to that goal. So they gave us a roadmap of all the various projects that we would need to do to meet the goal. It's not a detailed, and it's not an energy audit. It's not a detailed energy analysis of each project, but it does lay out, it says, okay, you need to retrofit your lighting to LED, you need to put in metering, you need to put in controls, you need to do envelope on these buildings. When you replace the roof, you need to put more insulation on. When you build a new building, you need to make it hit at least this number in terms of EUI. It's all these things. And it says there's a big, integrated spreadsheet. And it says if you do all that, then you will meet then you will get to 50%. As we went through it, we realized things changed. We realized that, okay, yes, that's a good solution for lighting, but if we put controls in, we can drive the number down further. Cost more money, more energy savings. There was some stuff in there that we had around envelope that we haven't done yet, but we might, like overcladding brick on buildings. Okay, yeah, you add some insulation on the outside. I haven't done it. But the things like that. And there was also, actually, from 8 years ago, dating this plan now, there was a cogen in the original plan, which we took out once we realized the carbon impact of that. And carbon became much more important. And we have got around that now with a load shedding battery is arriving next year, late this year. So I don't know if I answered your question. There's a lot there. I'll be happy to tell you more about that process.
Great. So next question, can you speak to how the Green Building Standards map closely or depart from the upcoming Ontario Building Code revisions and 2025 National Construction Codes?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly how they align with the 2025 Building Code, the 2025 National Code. My understanding is all these codes are kind of headed toward net zero at some point in the future. The one that's probably the most relevant to us here in Toronto is the Toronto Green Standard, because it's probably more stringent than these national and Ontario building codes. And the Toronto Green Standard, we know, is headed towards net zero by 2030. So a lot of the conversations we have internally when people might ask, is this a little too aggressive? It's like, hey, we have to do this anyway by 2030. We're just 4 or 5 years ahead of schedule, right? And so that kind of helps with having that conversation with people. Great.
Joan asked if the IMP is available to the public. Yes, it is, and I just dropped the link into the chat. So in the wake of COVID, has there been much discussion around air exchange rates related to efficiency? Have you revised anything in the standards as a result? And does your standard require all systems to be demand controlled?
Spencer, do you want to talk just in general about air exchange rates, or do you want me to just try to talk about it?
Yeah, you start.
Okay. I think when COVID started, we were really careful about not jumping the gun and going and making a bunch of changes on ventilation rates, not knowing where things would end up. In the end, we're just trying to stick to ASHRAE 62 rates and not necessarily going above and beyond those. In terms of demand controlled ventilation specifically, I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think we mandate it or require it, but to hit the energy use intensity targets, more often than not, we would probably get it as part of the solution, especially in densely occupied zones, right? Like a building with classrooms in it. I think you'd have to put in demand controlled ventilation to hit our energy targets.
Great. We've reached the end of the Q&A. Oh, another one's just coming in. On older buildings with high temperature requirements for terminal heating systems and AHUs, are you able in most cases to avoid gutting these systems to convert to low temperature hot water systems to meet the GHG reductions targets, or hybrid gas boosting electric systems have worked normally? Was guidance on this topic covered in the Type A standard?
So I'm just reading the question over.
Of course.
I think there's, fortunately for us, this is less of an issue for us. Like, being a college, most buildings are built 70s or newer. And anything that's older, it's been gutted, and they have pretty good envelopes. So we're able to go relatively low temp without too many issues. And like Spencer mentioned, as part of the IAMP, any buildings that had really poor envelopes, we did try to prioritize those and retrofit the envelope first, so they're in good shape now. I think I answered it, but if you want to put a follow up in there, I can try to.
I might add, Aman. So we didn't get into it on this project, but we have the Switch project, which Tessa alluded to at the beginning, which is our district energy project at our main campus, which is taking out the steam system and moving everything to hot water. But we're doing the whole campus at once, so it's a huge project with its own payback and everything else, but it's not in the green building standard because we're doing the whole campus at once. So any new builds on campus will have to tie into the hot water network, which won't be a problem because it'll be a new build. And any renovations that happen in the existing buildings, the building will have already been converted to hot water. They were already distribution of hot water, or almost all of them. So we're just taking it out the heat exchanger, and instead of a steam to hot water heat exchanger, we're going straight in with the hot water. So that's what we're up to, separate from everything else we've talked about. And that's how, well, a large way we're going to get to our 50% target is this project.
Great.
Yeah. Maybe can I add something as well? You just made me think of something. So the I think in that project, a lot of the buildings were operating around 80 to 85 Celsius within the buildings in terms of hot water temperature. We did a bunch of testing, a lot during COVID actually, and we found that we could get most of the buildings down to 70 to 75 Celsius. And so that solution in the Switch project is based on a maximum supply temperature in that range, 70 to 75 Celsius. And it's kind of the upper limit of what a heat pump can produce. And so like you said in your question, there's other sources of heat for when we need the higher temperatures.
Right. We have another question, which is, do you have an air leakage target for Type A or other? And if so, what is it? And how do you ensure alignment between design and construction?
Good question. No, we don't have like a whole building air leakage target. So one of the lessons learned from doing the passive house retrofit, where we were required to do a whole building air leakage test, is that it's really complicated. It's really expensive, right? We spent probably six figures, like in and around 100,000 from what I remembered, on doing a test.
More than that.
More than that. There we go. And the other thing is, like I think what you're hinting at in your question, it's pretty late, right? When you're doing that, like everything's sealed up, and it's hard to figure out where the leak's coming from and make the repairs. So if you read through the building envelope consultant scope of work language in the type A document, you'll see some stuff around air leakage, but it's mostly, we want the envelope consultant to develop a testing plan for air leakage that's catered to the building. They're looking at the design, figuring out where the weak spots are, you know, certain transitions, maybe where you have overhangs or, you know, parapets or two buildings joining together, right? Like these weak points, and we want them to focus on testing those in situ, in construction, and mock-ups as well, and testing out like assembly mock-ups, and then identifying if there's any issues, kind of identifying it early, and then having the contractor kind of not make the same mistake elsewhere. We're trying to avoid whole building air leakage testing, if at all possible. Some cases it might make sense, and we're open to it, but in general, we don't want to go there.
And the biggest argument for that was, okay, let's say it fails. What are you going to do? Everything's finished. You don't know where the hole is. So that's why we didn't go that way, but it might make sense in some situations.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm gonna wrap up with one question of my own. Do you have any advice for institutions that want to start taking baby steps?
Go for it.
Yeah, there's a lot you can do. I'd say doing your own version of the IEMP, if you can swing it, you know, your own strategic energy plan would be a great first step. You'd have to free up some dollars for a consultant, but I think that was a huge value for us, having these kind of broad discussions with senior management around climate and the risks was really important. And then you might not have the capital to do the work, but at least you're ready to go, right? So if a project comes up or money becomes available from the government, you know, you have something you can leverage to get funding. Otherwise, kind of like what I was saying earlier, I think so. Our green building standard, it's pretty aggressive, but it's designed in a way you could take it and you could scale it back. You know, cut it out just to the core elements. You know, if you did LEED Silver and zero carbon certification, I think you'd be most of the way there.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I think we can begin to wrap things up. We're almost at the hour. I'm also going to give a chance, anybody from OCUSP who wants to make any general announcements, just let me know in the chat and I'll unmute you, or I'll give you the ability to use your mic. But thank you everyone for joining us. I hope all of this information was very useful to you. You can also, Aman, I don't know if you want to bring up that last slide. I'm going to give everybody also a link to our sustainability LinkedIn page, in case you want to follow us and any kind of updates that we give. This is typically where we would announce something like, you know, the Green Building Standards and celebrate it. You can also email Aman and Spencer directly with any questions that you have after. I'll just drop their emails in the chat. And, oh, there they are. So thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. The recordings will be sent out. The slides will be sent out. And I think everybody should have everything that they need. So barring any other questions, I'll say goodbye and thank you everyone for your attention today. Have a really good rest of your day.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thanks.